Okay, I'm not sure how many of you are interested in going into the gaming industry, but if you are a hospitality major, you will end up taking a class on casino operations. And regardless of whether you end up taking that class or not, it is important for you to know that gaming is a big part of the tourism and hospitality industry. Now, there tends to be a lot of confusion with regard to should it be called gaming or should it be called gambling? All right, so if we're thinking about gambling, that basically has to do with wagering money or something of value on an event with an uncertain outcome with the primary intent of winning money or material goods. And there are three elements that are involved with gambling, and that is consideration, so considering whether or not this is a good idea, risk, which of course there is a risk, and a prize. Not that you'll necessarily win the prize, but the availability of a prize at the end. Now, here's the thing. In our industry, gambling is typically not a word that we use. Instead, we use the word gaming. Gambling tends to have a negative connotation because, and you'll see this from time to time on the news when they're talking about, oh, the amount of money that's, lost because of gambling and addiction and that sort of thing. So instead, we use the term gaming because, first of all, that implies that gambling is permitted by law. So gaming is permitted, it's allowed, and gaming is supposed to be fun and recreational and enjoyable. Okay, so it's not a bad thing like the word gambling suggests. Okay, but there is a lot of interest in gaming growing in Australia. Gaming has certainly been around for quite a while. You know, there's lots of historical references to it in China, Egypt, in Rome, obviously gladiators events, sports events. These were things that were bet on. This was brought to the New World by sailors and explorers. In terms of the countries that we most deal with here at UQ, in China, gaming is banned. Okay, so that is why a lot of people go to Macau to bet and to gamble, or to game, I should say. Obviously, we have the Melbourne Cup, which is held here in Australia. What is it? The 5 minutes around the world that everybody stops, or at least around Australia that everybody stops. And sports betting is, of course, allowed and has been allowed on the Melbourne Cup for a very long time. In terms of the US, I'm sure you've all heard of Vegas. That was the first place that gaming became legal in the US. But again, coming back to Australia, pokies, which are slot machines, they were available in bars in Australia starting in the 50s. Tasmania opened the first casino here in 1973. And then, of course, more recently, we've had this Interactive Gambling Act, which deals with online gambling. Now, ultimately, gaming always becomes an issue, particularly around election times, and that's because politicians, to a certain extent, they often berate gaming because of, again, like I said, the vice and the bad ideas and the potential addiction, this, that, and the other thing. But ultimately, they love it because so much money comes in from it, particularly tax revenue. So they're a bit two-faced when it comes to, loving it but hating it, but really loving it in the end. So this is Crown Casino down in Melbourne, which some of you may be familiar with. So in terms of gaming here in Australia, we do have a lot of the population that regularly participates in some capacity in betting of some sort. So lotteries, of course, are the biggest form of gaming that does take place. And we certainly don't want to give that up because we make so much money from it. Okay, so nationwide, we make about $23-24 billion every year from gaming. And this money makes up about 8% of all state and territory tax revenue. So that is really valuable, and that's a big reason why there is a big push in Australia to open more casinos and to make more gaming opportunities available. However, because of our small population, we are a bit limited in terms of how many people actually do participate and how much money we can actually make. We're also not going to be realistically attracting that many international tourists because why would they come to Australia to bet when they could go to Macau or to Vegas or somewhere else overseas, Monaco potentially. But nevertheless, it is still something that we do think about and discuss in our industry. And it's kind of a constant discussion. So no doubt throughout your career, you'll hear this a fair bit. So this is Vegas. Perhaps some of you have been here before. If you haven't, it's always a great place to go, regardless of whether you have an interest in gaming or not. The interesting thing with Las Vegas is, of course, Vegas was built on gaming. However, casinos and gaming really make up a very small amount of the money that Vegas makes. Okay, so Vegas makes over $60 billion every year from tourism, but only about 1/6 of that is from casinos. So gaming is kind of like an extra activity. It's really been, overshadowed by things like conventions, massive events, weddings, entertainment. So even though the casino floor is always, you can't get anywhere in a Vegas casino or a Vegas resort without going through the casino, it's a very small piece of the pie in terms of the tourism industry as a whole in Las Vegas. Now, this is quite different from Macau, okay? Macau really, really does depend on gaming for its revenue. It makes more than 3 times what Las Vegas makes in terms of revenue. However, only about half as many people go to Macau as go to Vegas every year. All right, so ultimately they make about $40 billion annually from tourism, okay? Tourism as a whole, okay? So $40 billion from tourism as a whole, $39 billion from casinos, all right? So as you can see, small amount of money being spent on other things, as opposed to Vegas, which makes $60 billion from tourism. $12 billion of that is from casinos. And again, tourism represents a massive part of Macau's GDP. So 3/4 of Macau's money comes from tourism. So when tourism stops, or if people were to suddenly go somewhere else instead of going to Macau to do their gaming, Macau would potentially be in quite a bit of trouble. Now, you'll go into quite a bit of detail with the casino class with regard to different types of games. But just to give you a very brief overview, bookmaking, that is essentially sports betting. I'm sure many of you are familiar with slot machines. Typically in a casino, these are the 4 departments of operations. So you've got your sports betting or your bookmaking. Typically your biggest set of operations comes from slot machines, and casinos love to have them because they don't take a whole lot of people to operate, as opposed to table operations where every card game has to have an employee sitting there, whether it's blackjack, baccarat, poker, whatever it may be. And then you do also have these other specialty games like Keno. Sometimes roulette and craps falls under table operations. Very often, particularly in larger gaming areas, it falls under what we call specialty games. So it really depends on where it is that you're working. Now, just a couple of things for you to keep in mind. So I worked in Vegas for almost 10 years, and I worked in the I worked in the convention side of things. So I never dealt with the casino. However, the one thing that I will say is the casino ultimately had a lot of pull over decisions that we made in Las Vegas. So for instance, I remember once having a group come in for a massive convention, a massive event, and the group spent no time at all in the casino. And so the casino came back and said, you cannot book that group again because we're losing money having them in-house because they're taking up all of our rooms. They are spending all of their time in the event area and going to parties. And as a result, our casino is empty because none of them are coming down to spend time at the machines or play table operations, that sort of thing. So even though the casino revenue was a small part of our gross revenue in Vegas, the casino often will be able to trump the hotel and other operations in terms of how things happen. So these are things to just keep in mind. If you end up working in a restaurant within a resort that has a casino, typically it is the casino that really rules the roost. So these are things to just keep in mind. Also, I will tell you that in Vegas, the people that drive the best cars are always the dealers. Okay, so it's not the casino operator, it's not the hotel manager or director, it's not even the VP. It ends up being the casino, the dealers. So, and they go to special training for to be able to do that. So these are just things to keep in mind. I will say it was very interesting working in Vegas. I loved it. I highly recommend it if you have any interest in doing that. You certainly do learn a lot, but hopefully this at least gives you a little bit of a basis for how the gaming industry works. And like I said, you're going to hear quite a bit about this throughout your BITM degree as well as in the future because it is such a major impact, a major sector within our industry. So you should have at least this basic understanding of how it works.